Imagine waking up tomorrow and the global supply chain, the very bloodstream of our economy, is clotting. Not because of a pandemic, not because of a cyber attack, but because of an island most people can't even point to on a map. An island made of ice and ancient rock. We're talking about Greenland, and right now it's becoming the flashpoint for a conflict that history proves can and will destroy fortunes and shift superpowers. This isn't a prediction. This is a pattern, a deadly, undeniable pattern that has already annihilated three economic titans, and it's playing out again right before our eyes in the freezing Arctic. They thought they were different every single time, and every single time, history delivered its verdict. So, why Greenland? Why now? For decades, Greenland was a frozen afterthought. Its immense landmass of 2.1 million square kilometers home to just 56,000 people. But the ice is melting, and beneath that melting ice lies a treasure trove that has awakened the sleeping giants. Rare earth elements, estimated to be among the largest untapped deposits globally, potentially housing 1 billion tons of ore. Cobalt, nickel, zinc, gold, resources vital for our electric vehicles, our smartphones, our entire digital infrastructure. But it's not just the minerals, it's the maritime highways. As the Arctic melts at an alarming rate, losing an average of 13.1% of its minimum sea ice extent per decade since 1979, new shipping lanes like the Northern Sea Route are becoming viable. These routes could cut transit times between Asia and Europe by 10-15 days, saving companies billions in shipping costs and fuel. This is an economic game changer. The architect of this brewing storm? The relentless, unforgiving force of global resource scarcity and strategic geopolitical competition. The mechanism is simple, yet devastating. Control the choke points, control the trade, control the critical resources, control the future. And Greenland is the ultimate choke point, the new resource frontier, guarded by NATO's northernmost outpost, Thule Air Base, a critical component of U.S. ballistic missile defense since 1951. When global powers, specifically the US, NATO, Russia, and China, start jockeying for position over such a critical piece of the economic puzzle, history doesn't just rhyme, it screams. Our first lesson comes from the 17th century, the era of the Dutch Golden Age. At its peak, the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, was the most valuable company in history. Its market capitalization, if adjusted, would be an astounding $7.9 trillion today. Their wealth wasn't built on land, but on the sea, controlling the lucrative spice trade from the East Indies. Spices like pepper and nutmeg were the critical resources, generating profit margins of 400% to 1,000%. But to control the trade, they had to control the choke points, the Strait of Malacca, the Cape of Good Hope. Britain, seeing this immense wealth, enacted the Navigation Acts of 1651, aiming to sever Dutch dominance. This wasn't just about tariffs, it was an economic declaration of war. What followed were three Anglo-Dutch wars, from 1652 to 1674, brutal naval conflicts costing thousands of lives and immense treasure. The Dutch, initially confident, thought their superior fleet and vast wealth made them untouchable. False security. They believed their economic power was too great to be challenged directly. But the persistent British challenge, funded by Parliament and driven by mercantile ambition, slowly eroded Dutch supremacy. The economic cost was staggering. Insurance rates for Dutch ships skyrocketed by 300% during blockades. Amsterdam's vibrant stock exchange suffered repeated crashes. Eventually, the treaties of Westminster and Breda formalized a shift in power. The British, though not completely supplanting the Dutch overnight, had fundamentally weakened their grip on global trade, paving the way for British maritime dominance in the centuries to follow. They tried to protect their spice monopoly, but the conflict opened their global supply lines to attack and ultimately diluted their economic strength. Sound familiar? A cold, resource-rich land, contested global trade routes, and superpowers vying for economic control. Next, let's fast forward to 1956 and the Suez Crisis. A mere 193-kilometer canal connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea became a geopolitical and economic earthquake. For nearly a century since its opening in 1869, The Suez Canal was a vital artery for global trade, especially for oil flowing to Europe. In 1956, Europe imported approximately 60% of its oil via Suez. When Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the canal on July 26, 1956, ostensibly to fund the Aswan Dam, Britain and France, who held significant shares in the Suez Canal Company, saw it as an existential threat to their economic lifelines. Israel also had its own strategic motives. They thought their combined military might and colonial legacy would allow for a swift, decisive reassertion of control. False security. They believed the Cold War superpowers would remain on the sidelines. They were wrong. The military intervention achieved its initial tactical goals, but the economic and political fallout was catastrophic. The closure of the canal forced ships to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 10,000 nautical miles and 2 weeks to journeys. Oil supplies to Europe were severely disrupted, causing fuel rationing in Britain and France. The price of crude oil spiked by nearly 15%. But the real collapse was financial and geopolitical. The British pound came under immense pressure, forcing the UK to seek emergency loans from the IMF and US Treasury, facing a potential 30% devaluation. US President Eisenhower, furious at not being consulted, wielded immense financial leverage, threatening to dump US holdings of the pound. This economic pressure forced Britain and France into a humiliating withdrawal, fundamentally altering the global balance of power and marking the irreversible decline of their colonial empires. They fought to secure their oil flow, but they lost their financial sovereignty and global prestige. Sound familiar? A critical choke point, essential resources, and global powers willing to risk economic stability for control. Finally, we turn to the brutal reality of the late 19th century, the scramble for Africa. In 1870, European powers controlled just 10% of Africa. By 1914, it was over 90%. This wasn't just about flags and maps. It was an economic land grab of unprecedented scale. Africa was seen as a vast, untapped reservoir of raw materials: rubber, diamonds, gold, copper. The Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 formalized this chaotic partition, setting rules for effective occupation. The colonial powers thought their technological superiority and civilizing mission justified their actions, believing the continent's resources were theirs for the taking without significant consequence. False security. They ignored the human cost, the indigenous resistance, and the seeds of future conflict they were sowing. The economic exploitation was immense. In the Congo Free State, King Leopold II of Belgium extracted vast amounts of rubber and ivory, leading to an estimated 10 million deaths from forced labor and atrocities between 1885 and 1908. While European industrial economies boomed, fueled by African resources, the long-term collapse was geopolitical. The arbitrary borders, the ethnic divisions exacerbated by colonial rule, the stolen wealth, all contributed to the instability that plagued the continent for decades, even centuries after independence. It created a permanent imbalance, a cycle of dependency and conflict that still impacts global markets today. They sought cheap resources for their industrial revolution, but they set the stage for generations of instability and the erosion of their own moral authority. Sound familiar? A vast, resource-rich, largely unpopulated land contested by global powers, leading to escalating tensions and irreversible long-term consequences. So, here we are. History doesn't just rhyme. It screams in the face of our current situation. Greenland, the new strategic choke point, the new frontier for critical rare earth minerals, the next Suez, the next spice route. We are not at stage 1. We are at stage 4, economic militarization. NATO has already increased its Arctic presence, conducting exercises like Cold Response 2022 with 30,000 troops, 220 aircraft, and 50 ships. Russia has reactivated Cold War-era bases and announced plans to increase its icebreaker fleet to 13 by 2035. China, despite being thousands of kilometers away, declared itself a near-Arctic state in its 2018 Arctic Policy White Paper, seeking to establish a polar Silk Road through these very waters. The data shows that global demand for rare earths is projected to increase by 500% by 2030, driven by the green energy transition, making Greenland's Kvanefjeld deposit, with its 100 million tons of rare earth oxides, a prize beyond measure. The U.S. has invested over $12.1 billion in its Thule air base alone, a clear signal of long-term commitment. These aren't just diplomatic squabbles. These are direct economic clashes disguised as security concerns. The escalating severity is clear, from diplomatic friction over resource concessions to increased military posturing. We are on a trajectory that leads directly to economic disruption and potentially kinetic conflict. The historical pattern is undeniable. Economic competition over strategic resources inevitably leads to social unrest, political instability, and eventually existential threats to global supply chains and financial markets. They thought they were different every single time. We have watched the pattern unfold 3 times before. Do not be caught unaware when it reaches stage 5, systemic collapse. The mechanism is simple. When the ice melts, the global economy overheats. 3 times this happened. 3 times superpowers underestimated the pattern. 3 times they tried to secure their future. And 3 times they ignited conflicts that reshaped the world and decimated fortunes. The British, the Dutch, the European colonial powers all thought their unique circumstances made them immune. They thought they were different. They were not. The signs in Greenland, from the strategic importance of Thule Air Base to the trillions in rare earth minerals, scream that the 4th time is already underway. Understanding these stages, recognizing where we are in history's terrifying script, is not just about staying informed, it's about protecting your wealth. This channel is dedicated to helping you decipher these patterns before they crush you. Subscribe now to understand Stage 6, the reordering phase, and what it means for your investments. Because while they argue over the melting ice, your portfolio could be frozen solid.